here, but I'm happy to be here live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Today we have a real special guest, a close friend of mine and someone that I am so grateful to know because he's one of the top sales gurus in my network, and I'm really appreciative. So let's go ahead and bring Shaun in. Shaun, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Dude, I'm doing great, and really appreciate your patience. So we're going to talk about elevating your sales with LinkedIn, but before we do that, I just kind of gave a brief intro. We've known each other for a long time. We're both Penn State alums. We're good friends, but one of the things I've admired most about you is a couple things. Number one, you're really just a remarkable human being, and it's a real honor to be your friend. But behind that friendship and behind that likability is literally one of the best sales minds that I've ever met in my life. I think for those people that are watching this live and for folks that might watch this later on, can you just share a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, sure. And, let me just, preface this by saying, you are far too kind in those words, but I appreciate it. So yeah, I've been in sales, let's say, for maybe a little over 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
My background from Penn State, like you said, is actually in health policy and administration. I thought I was going to get involved in, being an administrator at a hospital or a long-term care facility. But I found out, and this may be getting a bit in the weeds, but you're going to get that from me. I found out early on that I wasn't emotionally built for healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And so I segued into a local company called Pride Mobility Products,
Mm-hmm.
and I took a job in inside sales there because it was within the scope of healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And I always enjoyed, working with people from a client services standpoint. And I was inside sales there, so I was working with outside sales reps. So there wasn't a lot of cold calling and sales generation type of stuff. It was more like facilitating and communicating along those lines. And I really, really enjoyed the client interaction side of it and wanted to get into an outside sales position, and was offered an opportunity with a family-owned business out in the back mountain called Paint Printery.
Yeah.
At the time, their VP of sales was a good friend of mine, Brett Gauntlet, and he said, "Hey, we'll give you an opportunity to be an outside sales rep if you want to take it." And all I heard out of that conversation, he's like, "Listen, we'll give you a car and we'll blah blah blah." And after car, I didn't, I was only out of college for 90 days, so I heard that and that was good enough. But I really found a home with that company and with the family that owned and operated it, and learned a lot about sales along the way. Brett had done an amazing job with sales. And I think at the time they weren't utilizing technology,
Mm-hmm.
to aid that process. So I think coming out of Penn State, I started to introduce some of that. Is that too much?
No. I think, so how many years total here of experience?
21.
You don't have to disclose numbers. I'm familiar with it, but when you came in versus where you took the organization, because you led the sales organization at Payne for how many years?
Oh boy. So let's see. It's the sales side of it for maybe 15.
Mm-hmm.
15. And it worked again. It worked really well. Brett, I think, gave me an opportunity there to again introduce some new processes.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I worked together to identify those verticals and where our niche was, and really both wanted to provide a high value service. So all of those things, it was a team effort, is my point. You know what I mean? Nothing that we did from a sales standpoint was done because I was driving the bus. It was the team that really facilitated the success.
Sure. But I know that from having gotten to know you and having, had you do some consulting for LSEO over the last couple of years, and really you have a remarkable expertise and point of view on how to build and scale businesses. And so we're going to chat about today is how to use LinkedIn. And so for the folks that are watching, right, I'll give you my opinion on LinkedIn in a little bit, but just so we know, so we have sort of a basis of why this is important. 675 million monthly users. 57% of LinkedIn users are men, 43% are women. 27% of Americans are on LinkedIn. 51% of Americans with a college education use LinkedIn. 61% of LinkedIn users are between 25 and 34 years old. And 57% of LinkedIn traffic is mobile, right? So this is let's just say it's a higher educated early adopter, sort of trending with where mobile is kind of like, taking on the world. So this is a really important tool. And you and I, a week or two ago, had a conversation on this, and I said, tell me more. And you shared with me a deck that you put together that I went through it, and I found myself logging into my LinkedIn and optimizing on the fly. And for those of you watching me on LinkedIn, you see my profile, you'll see that, I've put a lot of time into it over the years. I share lots of content and I use many of the LinkedIn tools. And in fact, today's interview was because I had applied to be able to do this live on LinkedIn. Like, not anybody could do it. You have to have a certain number of followers, et cetera. So I start from the premise that LinkedIn is important, and I think everybody that just heard those statistics will agree. But let me walk you through a couple questions, and hopefully you could educate folks that are watching this in the same way that you candidly educated me. I was taking notes, I was taking action as I was going through your deck. So why is social selling important?
So, what's interesting about this, and full disclosure, I got a preview of some of these questions. But so this is such an important question, and I could probably talk for 30 minutes about why social selling is important, but this is sort of the short answer to it. The sales profession has changed drastically over the course of the last, 20 years that I've been involved in it, and technology has been a big part of that. Because early on when LinkedIn was, originally launched, everybody was jumped in it, right? But it didn't really, the platform didn't have a lot of effectiveness, at least for me, right? I was on the platform and I had a profile, but I didn't invest a lot of time into it. LinkedIn has since added tools to make it more effective, but back then it had not, right? So, but again, it was a new tool for sales professionals that are starving for opportunities to find and identify potential clients. So what I'm getting at with this is nowadays, back then we would pick up the phone and call. When I started at Payne, their sales reps at the time didn't have computers on their desk. They had notepads, pens, a giant blue book of industry numbers, right, and tablets, and that's how they operated. So it was like, LinkedIn is just another tool, right? We can pick up the phone and cold call prospects. And there was a time that was incredibly effective. Now, and don't get me wrong, that's the most important piece of the puzzle. It's the scariest, I think, for sales professionals, because it's inherently intrusive. You can't time it all the time on a cold call. I'm going to pick up the phone and call Chris Jones. I could catch you in the middle of a fire drill. I don't know, right? And if my timing is bad, you know what I mean? I'm out, right? So, and especially with caller ID and all these different things, people don't necessarily answer the phones. So sales professionals have to fire on all cylinders, and not all do. Like, you have to adapt to that new environment, so you have to make the phone calls and you have to send the emails. You have to be on LinkedIn. If you're comfortable sharing who you are and utilizing like social profiles like Instagrams and Facebooks, do that. I put myself out there on social media. I don't hide a thing. I don't sugarcoat it. You know what I mean? I put myself 100% out there so that people can really get to know who I am. Right. So LinkedIn is just that. It's another one of those channels that salespeople absolutely have to be taking advantage of, because you have to get noticed. Yep. Right. And so if you're not firing on all of those cylinders to try to say, hey, I'm a good guy, I'm a good person out here trying to earn a living, and I have value to add,
Mhm.
you're making a big mistake.
The thing, though, Shaun, to be fair, and I don't think we've really chatted about it, is there's a big difference between using social selling as a way of coming across as sort of a soupy sales. All this person really wants to do is sell to me, versus what I've seen you do over the years, which has is remarkable, really, how you use these tools to build relationships, how you use these tools to share content that I hope we could get to, so you could give some tips on what you think effective content and sharing is all about.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, LinkedIn is a tool for business professionals to connect. So how do folks that are watching this avoid coming across as salespeople? And before you answer that, one of the reasons why I was so intrigued when you said, "Hey, Chris, I've been, putting together and studying sort of LinkedIn as a sales tool," I was like, "Oh my God," because I'll be honest, I have been fairly outspoken about the fact that it's easy to see when someone tries to connect with me and they want to sell me something. And I've validated that by accepting their friendship and within seconds feeling like I'm being sold to. So again, LinkedIn is supposed to be a tool for business professionals to connect. It's also a great way for folks that want to get noticed if they're in the job market to have their sort of digital resume up there. But I'd love to hear your point of view for a minute or two on the importance of your approach, such that you don't offset the person that you're trying to connect with and ultimately at some point sell to.
Sure. So, what I apply to LinkedIn is a lot like what I do with all those other channels, even on the calling aspect and everything else. My sales cycle historically, right, it takes a little longer than maybe the guys to my right or my left, right? Like it takes me a little longer to develop a relationship. Mm-hmm. But I find that when I do, they tend to last a little bit longer. So like I'm super respectful of people's time and how I approach them. I'm not trying to, and the funny part is, like, if you think about sales, I'm not ever really trying to sell you something. You know what I mean? Like, even though that's my job, and I mean that, like, that's not hokey. Like, I really don't want to sell anybody anything. In an ideal world, the people that I'm reaching out to, I legitimately believe that I can add value to their process. Mm-hmm. Maybe I save them money, maybe I find efficiencies, maybe I bring some level of knowledge to the table to help them be better at what they do, right? So, but that's sort of what I'm trying to get out there. And LinkedIn is like that. You sort of touched on this. A lot of times someone, I'll get all these people, hey, so-and-so wants to connect with you, Chris Jones wants to connect, whoever that is, and I will accept all of those invites. And I'll tell you why, but a lot of times when those invites come from salespeople, and I mean a lot of times, you've experienced this, I'm sure everybody listening has experienced this, I'm pitched immediately. And what's funny about that is I don't know this person at all, right? And just like if I reach out to you on the phone, my goal is not to talk to you for 45 minutes on an initial call, right? I just want to say hello, make a brief introduction, and maybe find out when we can have a lengthier talk on your terms. LinkedIn circumvents your terms, right? I'll get a message that's a mile long with links and PDFs. No one is ever going to respond. At least I would never. I mean, you would probably agree. No one is going to respond to that tactic. In fact, I'm rarely to interact with that person at all. Even if they start to do the right things, that first impression put me off. So I think that's the most common mistake that I see in LinkedIn from a sales perspective. They're trying to sell me a product or service.
So what are some of the common mistakes? One is lengthy, salesy related, sort of like I'm being sold to. Any other ones come to your mind that are common mistakes that salespeople use or misuse LinkedIn?
Well, I mean, that's the most common. Messaging is overly abused, right? Like messaging that is like, they see it as an email. Maybe they don't have my personal email. It's on there, but I'll get a tremendous amount of messages from the same person, right? So if I didn't respond once, they hit me up a second time, a third time. Hey, don't know if you saw this. Maybe you missed this.
Mhm.
So then they might start commenting on, maybe I post something, they comment on the post. I can't tell you how many times somebody posts in the comment and they say, hey, don't know if you saw my message.
Yeah.
Well, of course I saw your message. Right? But now you're referencing the thing that's already put me off.
Mhm.
Like you can comment. Commenting, I think, is extremely effective, but only if the comment is relevant to, if Chris Jones posted something interesting, an article that Chris Jones read that he found to be valuable.
Yeah.
If I legitimately read that article and wanted to comment with something that was relevant to that, to create a legitimate conversation between you and I, not to sell you,
Mhm.
but just to create a legitimate conversation, that's the beginnings of how to appropriately use LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Right? Because now if I do provide a comment on something that you were interested in, that you find valuable, you may respond to that.
Sure.
And that's the beginnings of a relationship.
Yep. It's interesting. Let's transition. We got about 6 to 8 minutes left. We want to kind of peel back the onion because that's just, you've got somebody with your level of expertise. I want folks to walk away with some tips and strategies, but let's transition. If you look at Shaun, this is his quarantine look. He's lost like how many pounds?
Oh man, like 22,
which is crazy because he was already a cyclist and athlete, Ironman before that. And then you look at me, you guys can see my beard. By the way, this is the first time I've done my hair in about a month and a half. And there's 2 reasons. One is because I had this interview with Shaun, and the other is because I have a board of trustees meeting today with Misericordia University. But hey, listen, I'd much prefer wearing a hat and kind of, taking the quarantine look to the fullest. Kind of like this kind of like scruffy look about me, but I wish I was about 20 pounds lighter like you.
Well, I shaved this morning and put on a shirt, but I'm not wearing pants.
Oh, that's great. Well, of course.
I'm still half quarantined.
You're quarantine ready. So, all right. So LinkedIn as a tool for sales, how do you elevate your sales, right? So, LinkedIn is bidirectional, right? So people could find you and you could find others. So let's talk quickly about your profile on LinkedIn. Walk us through some tips, strategies. This is an area where when I was going through some of the tips you shared with me, I was not only taking notes, but I was actually in real time taking action.
Sure.
Go ahead and give some tips.
So what I'm wondering, do you think, would it be valuable, if I'm referencing specific things on a profile, would you want me to share the deck? Should I share the screen and we can sort of walk through that?
Sure.
All right, let me see if I can do that correctly here.
Yeah, there was 1 or 2 or 3 things that really, really jumped out.
Can you see this?
Let's see, on air. I could see half of it, but I'm in the admin.
All right. So when I see the on air, it looks to me that the entire slide is visible.
That's great.
So I'm hoping that that's the case. So what I'll do is I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, just in terms of time. But if anybody that's watching has any specific questions around any of these topics, right? Like we can definitely dive into that. We could set up conversations, whatever is valuable. So I like to look at a LinkedIn profile top to bottom. A lot of people have profiles, obviously. The ones that don't have a profile photo, I find shocking.
Yeah.
The ones that don't have cover images, I find shocking, because all of those, what I consider as incomplete profiles within LinkedIn, tell me that is a person that cares little about the details, right? And if you're sitting here listening to this, and you're like, oh man, I don't really have a cover photo, but it's not because I don't have details. Well, that's okay, right? Then go ahead and make that change to it, right? Because I think it's important that if you're a professional, you put your best foot forward. So care about the details, right? Don't leave any incomplete sections on your LinkedIn page. So obviously I use Ron Burgundy here because I like to use humor when I can, but pick a good social photo for your profile pic. It doesn't always have to be like a headshot. I'm using Ron Burgundy as a headshot, but I personally love more of a candid type of photo for those things. Let people see who you are. Let them see your personality. But what you're seeing here in this slide is I've sort of adopted this, what I call a halo. You probably are seeing some of this in your social media feeds, which is really just this sort of circle around the outside of an image. The reason I like this is because if you comment on somebody's post, like let's say there's 100 comments, right? Most people that are posting things, they're generally not going to go through and read all 100 comments.
Hmm.
But I love putting like a brightly colored halo around my photo because it's going to catch someone's eye. It's going to draw some degree of attention. So that right now is somewhat unique. I see it growing in LinkedIn. So eventually my guess is, it'll be a little bit less of a tactic. Maybe tactic isn't the right approach.
Yeah.
But I do like the way it presents a profile pic within a comment stream, right? So my suggestion is put some thought into your profile pic. And if you're comfortable creating a halo such as the one that I'm showing here with Ron Burgundy, I would encourage you to do that, right? That's one simple thing in terms of thoughtfulness around a profile pic. A cover as well. Like, look, we all know Vaynerchuk, you actually personally, me just as a fan. I just use this as an example, but to use a relevant background is a great idea. Number one, because a lot of people, because LinkedIn does give you a limited library of available photos here. But if you use those, it's a missed opportunity. It's an opportunity to pass along a message or something. So you can see in Vaynerchuk, he's obviously using a custom one. And these are so easy to generate right now. And if by the way, if you are not a sales professional and you're not utilizing at least the free level of Canva, right? You're making a mistake, because Canva makes a lot of these things easier. Right. And instead of me just throwing content into a social post, I associate it with a nice graphic that I make for free on Canva, and it just creates much more traffic. So same thing, utilize Canva, for example, create a relevant cover photo for your LinkedIn page.
This one, by the way, real quick, Shaun.
Yeah.
Once I looked at this tip, I looked at my back and I was like, I'm kind of okay with it. But then I looked at some of the examples, like you're about to give some. If this is a great area. If you've got a lot of different things going on, this is an area where you could use that cover to highlight those areas. It's almost like what you want to draw the attention to that will be in your kind of the resume that's below it. So I think there's a ton of like creativity that could go into that, to the cover, which I kind of took for granted before I realized that you saw this as a really important factor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this one here, I think it's funny, and I feel bad because I do call some people's profiles out within this deck, but this Deborah Korn is actually, and again, I work in the print world predominantly these days, and Deborah Korn is one of those people who is just an outspoken advocate of print. She puts out a lot of great content, so I'm absorbing a lot of those things to sort of educate myself. But I use her as an example because it may be extreme. Yeah. You have an opportunity, in your profile below your name, to place some content there. She goes as far as to say intergalactic ambassador to the printiverse, which might be a little bit much, right? But my point is, a lot of people would say vice president of sales, right? Sales associate, Northeastern region, whatever those things are. But it's not going to catch anybody's attention in any way. So my feeling is, maybe don't go crazy, but this is an opportunity to create something memorable, right? So put something like I change mine all the time. Like right now, mine's like stops, collaborates, and listens. So there's those couple people that love Vanilla Ice, like I love Vanilla Ice, right? So right, like if it creates a smile, it creates a memorable experience, then that's your goal has been achieved in that. So think about what you're going to say there. Consider it not necessarily being your position within your organization.
Yep.
All right. So then I talk a little bit here in the creating a summary. We don't have to get all into this. And by the way, share this deck with anybody that wants this, that's listening in. And, HubSpot has been a great resource for pulling some of this content. They have some tools here that tell you how to write a really effective summary.
Yep.
But again, a lot of people in there put very specific things to what their job responsibilities are. And my feeling is use it to speak to your expertise. Let people know what you're really about. It doesn't necessarily have to be like, hey, I run these 3 pieces of equipment. Yep. You know what I mean? Like, so use it as an opportunity to tell people a little bit more about you and what your expertise is. And then I love this, by the way. I love the addition of adding rich media to a post. I'm sorry, to your profile page. So if you have video content, if you're writing original content, if you had a post that performs well, a link to your website, there's so many different things that you can place here on your profile. But yet so many people do not have content there. Yep. But again, it's an opportunity that is missed if you're not using it. Yep. So again, whether it's and we can get into writing original content. I love that on LinkedIn, but this is where a lot of those things should live. Anything that you think gives people insight into you or your organization that will help you along the way. Rich media opportunities on your LinkedIn profile are a great place to put that.
Yeah, and one point you didn't mention, it used to be more popular in the past, but LinkedIn acquired, the leading company on decks, things that you put together if you speak at a show and stuff like that. So you could actually put, full on, decks, so you could add this deck that you're going to share with people to your profile and they could see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So these are definitely, those are definitely the things that I would say are critical to a profile. And let's just touch on this last piece before I spend too much time on these slides, Chris. But this for me may be the most important. If you are not actively asking for recommendations, I think you're doing yourself a great injustice. And like you think about it in terms of like SEO, right? So you want to have wonderful, not recommendations. What's the word that I'm looking for? It's escaping me now. Chris, help me out here. Like on your Google My Business, like
references, you mean?
Say again?
References?
Yes, right. So basically, when you're thinking about wanting for customers to give you feedback so that you can put that on your Google My Business page, this is sort of the equivalent of that in the LinkedIn world. Nothing speaks to you as a person, as a professional, as the people that you've worked with.
Sure.
Right. So, for example, you will see an invite from me later today that says, hey, would you write Shaun Daney a recommendation, And I say, if you have people that you've worked with and you haven't reached out to them, that's a mistake. I tell people all the time, look, I can tell you that I do a great job, and I can tell you that I'm detailed, and I can tell you that I work hard. And I can tell you that I have all this knowledge around print and whatnot. But just take a few minutes to look at my LinkedIn profile on your own time and listen to what other people have to say. It'll give you some insight. They were in your position at one point.
Yep.
So those are a few of the things around the profile without getting too deep in the weeds. I mean, I could, and I'm sure you know this, I can talk about this kind of stuff all day.
So, awesome. And you gave a number of great tips, and anybody that wants the deck could reach out to myself or Shaun via any of the social networks, and we'll get you that deck. Yeah. But in closing, right, like I said earlier, there's two sides. It's almost like anything, like you only have so many people that you could broadcast to, and one of the tips you give is to accept all connections.
Yeah.
To each their own on that one. I don't accept them from wealth managers, insurance salespeople. No, okay. But there's a second piece of this. And if you could grow your network, the amount of connections you have, you become that much more powerful. And so in terms of your sales strategy. Mm-hmm. So just speak to this idea of mutual connections, and how do you grow the size of your LinkedIn network?
Sure. So I think the mutual connections is exactly why I accept all of those invites.
Yeah.
So I accept them for a couple of reasons. One, I'm a sales professional, right? So I want people to accept my connections. So I feel like it's a good gesture, right? It's a professional courtesy. I'm going to accept them. But also in doing so, right? Like we understand how LinkedIn has first level connections, second level connection, third level connections. Well, there have been times when I wanted to connect with people on LinkedIn that have been out of my network. You'll get a notification. I'm sure, I don't know if you've seen that. You may not have. I have, where it says, hey, Chris Jones is out of your network. So I can't get to you. But the broader I cast my net, the more opportunities I have to utilize mutual connections. right? And mutual connections are 5 times more likely to engage than if I just reach out, to someone who I have no mutual connections with, and that's the goal. So
Yep.
I think that by utilizing mutual connections, and you can do that in a few different ways. You can ask for introductions, but I generally don't do that. Because I don't ever want to necessarily I will ask for a recommendation. I generally don't ask for introductions. It's a useful tool. You can do it, but I haven't done it because I don't ever want to put somebody in a position where they feel, they kind of have to do that because, for any one reason, they feel obligated to do that. I try not to put people in that position. But again, like utilizing and accepting all of those and utilizing mutual connections is really just casting the broader net, because if I accept, I don't know who you know. Right? So even though you may not be a relevant prospect for me, like maybe somebody reaches out who does something that is just not in my wheelhouse or in my circle, that doesn't mean that they don't have a connection that I want to get to.
Sure.
And all of a sudden those people show up in the people I may know field, right? And by the way, I reach out to at least 5 people daily, 5 to 10 people a day, and I'll go in and I'll search, depending on what I'm looking to do. I'll go in and I'll search for a keyword, look for people with specific job titles and look through and be like, okay, like this is a group of people that are relevant. I'll invite. And when they accept, I don't instantly message them.
Yeah.
I put them in that hopper. I watch what they're doing. What groups are they in, right? I love groups because groups, you may have one connection in a group. Right. But once you're accepted into that group, now you have access to the broader scale. And if you can add value there in the form of content or something else, you could, you know what I mean? Especially if that particular group is relevant to what you're selling.
Yeah. As you've chatted and given tips and experiences, I've kind of realized that, I'm so fortunate that I actually have the LinkedIn Live channel and with 675 million monthly users, I think I have a pretty distinct advantage for us to continue this conversation and a little bit deeper. Like I said, the content that you put together, Shaun, I've always leveraged LinkedIn, and I think I have like 8,000 or 9,000 connections or something. I've only leveraged it for inbound with few exceptions. I've used it successfully to raise venture capital. So it's a great place to, create a connection with people that might not be as responsive to the voluminous email that they get, among other things. Or if you have to call them, you'll never get to them. So I found LinkedIn to be one of those tools where you could really get into the inbox of influencers. But since I went through your deck, each day I've actually been using the suggestion. So people, like if I go into mine, it'll say, because I'm part of something called the Forbes Agency Council, and they'll follow other Forbes Agency Council people. I went to Penn State University. And so it's like follow other people with similar resumes to you that went to Penn State, and then civic organizations and stuff. And so, I've probably proactively added more LinkedIn connections in the last week to 2 weeks since I got those tips from you than I have. And so I really appreciate it. And I think we can do these more frequently on this particular topic, so that we really feel like we give the entire idea of elevating your sales with LinkedIn the justice that it deserves. And it's not sort of a 30-minute podcast.
Sure.
With that said, this is a sort of like closing statement for you, which is, what are the top 2 or 3 tips? And I'd like to hear something that fits into that Shaun Daney magic, which is, this is a guy that you never feel like you're being sold to. We have so many stories here at LSEO that we're going to keep here because they're gold. But some of the things that Shaun has done just to build relationships is just, it's still masterclass. So in closing, on your side, what are 2 or 3, guys, do this and don't do that?
Are we talking general sales, or are we talking within LinkedIn? Are we staying on topic?
Shaun, what's the magic? At the end of the day, let's assume that they've optimized their profile. They have a nice cadence daily with, growing their network. What's going to really work longer term when you're talking about LinkedIn as a sales tool? Maybe this is more of a broader Shaun Daney magic. I just need you to share it. I just need
Sure. Yeah, I don't know about magic, but so a couple of things. So number one, I think, and this is just sales in general, right? Is just be genuine, right? People can spot when you're not being genuine, right? Don't throw pitches out there. Don't throw comments out there that are completely irrelevant. Be genuine in your approach, and be patient. LinkedIn is not a shortcut. Right. It's the very beginnings of relationship building. If you utilize it properly, you can take the coldness out of the cold call. Right. So I would say do those things. Do not be overly aggressive. That's on LinkedIn. That's on the phone. Know that not every prospect is going to connect with you. Right. So for me, Chris, like I tend to, and you'll know this, I tend to use humor. Like that's my personality. I find humor in a lot of different things. And so I try to breathe some of that into the process. Like I'm constantly, and this, I send photos to clients and prospects all the time. Like if it's in the print world and I'm on press, I like people to know that I'm there. Right. And I'm not using it as a tactic. I'm being genuine. I want them to know that I'm there and I'm working hard trying to do a good job. So be creative in that. Don't be afraid to try things like that. I've done little videos and sent them to prospects that I've had some trouble getting on the phone. And I say, look, out of respect for your time, I'm going to pretend you're sitting across the desk from me and I'm just going to chat with you for a few minutes. And I've sent those things out and people respond to it because it's a little different.
Sure.
Right. So I will not say think outside the box because everybody says that, but just be creative in your approach to things. People will buy from you, not because of the company you represent, not because of the service you offer. And in some cases, right, if you have this amazing, if you're selling ice to igloos or to Eskimos, but people will buy from people that they like. And if you're genuine in your approach, you legitimately want to provide value, people will respond to that. They will buy from you. So I mean, is that a little taste?
Awesome. I think that is like the perfect end note to this this live between the two of us. Thanks so much for your time.
I appreciate
it. Like I said to those that are watching, feel free to reach out to Shaun or I. We'll make sure you get that deck. And if any of you have any suggestions where Shaun and I could take a deeper dive on this topic, it's something that I'm personally very interested in because the way that Shaun approaches building and scaling businesses, I think, like I said earlier, is masterclass. So anything we could do to get this guy to come back would be really good. So Shaun, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend and enjoy.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate your time.
Hey, buddy.
Take care.